Welcome to the Vin Armani Show. We are streaming live on YouTube at youtube.com/Vin Armani. We are also on Twitter and Periscope at Vin Armani is my handle there. And of course, we are streaming live, as always, on the Facebook page of our content partner, Activist Post. So that's facebook.com/Activist Post. Well, it's 10 a.m. Monday morning, and we are back broadcasting live from fabulous and maybe only 95 degree, but still hot, Las Vegas, Nevada. We've got a great show for you today. Our guest today is the Executive Director of the 10th Amendment Center, Michael Boldin. We are going to discuss the 10th Amendment. We're going to talk about ideas of nullification. We're going to talk about where the notions of states' rights come from. He doesn't consider himself to be a libertarian or an anarchist or a statist, but is definitely an individualist, very dynamic guy, so I think that this is going to turn out to be an excellent episode. I'm looking forward to asking him a ton of questions. Also, we are going to be covering the ongoing feud between Trump and CNN, talking a little bit about what's going on and what has gone on with the G20, specifically as how the media, the mainstream media, has been covering it. We've got stories about the Vatican. We have stories about the ongoing saga with Coinbase and the IRS, and some other little tidbits as well that we're going to get into. And to help me do that today, as always, my good friend, co-host, and producer, Mr. Christian Reyes. Christian, good morning.
Good morning, Vin. How you doing?
I'm doing it. I'm not really hearing you that much. Are you there?
I'm here.
Oh, yeah.
Better?
Yeah, your mic's good.
Okay,
Yeah, that's much better.
Cool.
So, dude, I'm looking forward to the interview today. Michael Boldin. I don't know
Yeah.
how much you know about the 10th Amendment Center, but I'm guessing that we probably have quite a few people watching the show who haven't before, because they've gained quite a following since he's actually the founder. So since he founded it, and today's good because, you know, we've really been, the ongoing theme has seemed to be principles over preferences.
Right.
And the Bill of Rights in particular, I mean, we even mentioned the Bill of Rights in the last show, it's a principled set of rules. And it's this country, really, I mean, more than the Constitution, the Bill of Rights is the foundation of this country, right?
Yeah.
More than the sort of logistics of the Constitution, like who can be president, how long does he serve, blah, 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 blah. Every country's got that.
Right.
But there are no other countries, as far as I know, that have the type of principled rights enumerated and spelled out like there are in the Bill of Rights. And the 10th Amendment is an interesting one because that's dealing with all the things that are not mentioned in the Bill of Rights, and it gives it to the states and the people. We're going to talk with Michael about that, what that really means. Interesting
cool.
concept. It may be the bug in the system. I don't know. I've had a few issues with it before. But we are going to talk principles and preferences, right? Because I think that the key is to try to get to the root truth. I think that's what this, of course, there's no absolute truth, but that's
Right.
what this show, I think, if you go back and you look, what are we fundamentally trying to do? We're trying to get at solutions, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yep.
But first, let's actually figure out what the hell the problem is, right? And we got to come at it from all angles. So, yeah, we're going to talk about it from a constitutional basis. We talk about it from a principled basis. We talk about it from an economic basis. This is just yet another chance to do that.
Looking forward to it.
It should should be excellent.
I was looking at his Twitter yesterday, and it looked really cool. So definitely.
He knows his
forward.
shit.
Yeah.
He knows his shit for sure. We are, I think the whole show right now, this particular show is principles versus preferences. And how do you identify? I hope that people walk away from this show like, oh, I can tell the difference between, I know what Vin means when he says that's a preference and he says that's a principle. Interesting, not a storyline per se, something that I thought about including into the show, but it deserves a mention. Principle over preference, states' rights. We've been talking about criminalization, legalization, decriminalization. Oregon passed through their legislature a bill to do what they called decriminalization of the possession of controlled substances. We're talking
Interesting.
ecstasy, cocaine, heroin, methamphetamines. I took a look at it. Initially, I was like, oh, that's interesting. Oregon's going to do a decrim. You know, they already have legalized weed. And it took the penalty down from a felony for those down to a misdemeanor.
Wow.
Didn't decriminalize, took it down to a misdemeanor. And I know, on face value, you look and you're like, oh, well, that's so much better to get a misdemeanor rather than a felony. And it got me really to thinking, and it goes to some of the solutions, or at least some of the potential actions that I'm sure we'll talk about with Michael Boldin, and that we've talked about with other people who support state solutions, either through the Libertarian Party or like Adam Kokesh running for, president. I'm really wrestling as a principled individual, as someone who considers himself an anarchist and a voluntarist. I very much wrestle with the idea of not principles, but preferences, that if the state's going to be involved, how do we decide? Because clearly, some laws are preferable to other laws, right? Like, certainly if they said, well, we're going to reduce the penalty for possession of cocaine from death, we're going to hang you, right? Or we're going to shoot you with a firing squad. We're going to reduce that penalty to, 3 years in prison. You say, okay, that's good. I think that's a much better solution. Preferable.
Yeah.
It still is not recognizing the principle that I'm allowed to put whatever I want in my body.
Right.
That the state doesn't own my body. The state is still claiming ownership of my body. But then you ask, okay, well, they reduce it to a misdemeanor. Now, most misdemeanors are going to be pled down. If the person's got no previous problems, they're going to go on probation. They're going to pay a fine. And you start to think like, but doesn't that actually benefit the state? Because a felony, putting you in prison, now you're just a complete drain on state resources, right? They have to pay they have to pay to house you. They have to pay to feed you. All of this. But if you pay a fine and you go, the state actually makes money.
Wow.
As opposed to the felony. So you start to say, well, is this actually better? It's better for the state.
Yeah, and it's congruent to what they would do.
And the state is an institution with a monopoly on violent force. So you're like, is the alternative that's financially better for the criminal the better alternative? This is what I struggle with. Because obviously for the individual involved, it would seem on its face that, getting a misdemeanor charge, not going to jail, is way better than going to jail for years. And it's clearly better for the state that they don't have to put you away. But it's better for the state.
Yeah.
That leaves the state more money to do other shit.
Other bad shit.
So thinking about that this week, and then these tweets happened. Some tweets that I want to show because it goes directly to this, because it's about principles and preferences. It's about the state, and it's about the money generated by the state or lost by the state through their actions, and it has to do with imprisonment. And I had to draw attention to this because I just want to talk about it briefly. Came from the private formerly known as Bradley, aka Chelsea Manning. Here was the tweet that got a lot of people's attentions, thousands of likes, thousands of retweets. It says, oh boy. So it's a response to somebody saying, because taxation is theft, comma, you have no right to someone's labor. Now, I think for people who are voluntarists, we frame that sentence a little. I know what he was trying to say, but the way that we say this sentence is, because you have no right to someone's labor, comma, taxation is theft. Or you have no right to someone's labor, therefore, taxation is theft. And Chelsea Manning tweeted back, taxation is a sharing of responsibility, rainbow emoji. Only the wealthy believe that taxation is theft. They don't pay taxes. We should make them. So, violent coercion to take someone's money. Now, of course, this country founded on the idea that life, liberty, and property are not to be. So, the government's not to take your life, they're not to take your freedom, and they're not to take your property without due process. And we're going to talk about that with Michael Boldin, without equal protection by the law. So this is coming from somebody who was just released from prison for exposing the immorality of the state and was imprisoned for exposing the immorality of the state, who says, no, we should take immoral actions to take people's money and give it to the state, who will then use it to imprison people like me. And yet it goes further. Later on in the day, same conversation. Someone says, if it isn't theft, then why do we have to be threatened by force to pay them? Chelsea Manning says, we are threatened by force to participate in wage labor every day. Which is, so I guess Chelsea Manning has gone full socialist. Threatened by force to participate in wage labor every day. I know I've always had a gun to my head to go into work, and I know that if I don't go into work, they send people with guns to come and get me. I know that's happened to every single person in the audience. So you're threatened by force, Chelsea says. Still later in the day, on a rant, all jobs are going away, replaced by automation. The jobs are not coming back. We need to figure this out. We need each other. Heart emoji, rainbow emoji, heart face emoji, 3 globes, woman and woman, man and woman, man and man emojis. So Christian, this is what's amazing about preferences over principles, right? I know that there has been a saga of Chelsea Manning wanting the government, because Chelsea Manning's technically still active duty military, wanting the government to pay for a sex change operation on the taxpayer's dime. Right? That this is fundamentally what this is about. And it's like there were more tweets later on in the day that it was about it should be for healthcare, like the government should spend it on healthcare. And it's like, yo, didn't you just spend time in jail for exposing the fact that the government spends money not on the shit that it's supposed to,
right,
and actually spends money on illegal and immoral shit? What? My battery's low. Lost the camera, Christian. Hold on, let me see if I can plug this thing in. What is happening over here, dude? Let's see. Yes? Yes? No? No. Christian. We gotta have this camera. There we go. There we go.
There we go.
Bang.
Back on.
I think it's the heat, bro.
Yeah.
I think it's the heat. 90 here. So, back to the point. We know that the government, and clearly this is someone who, if anybody would know, we know that the government, that the state steals money and then uses it as the state sees fit. The Pentagon lost, what, $6 trillion and doesn't know where it is? Like, here's the prime person who should be skeptical of the government, who should be skeptical of money being spent as it's supposed to be spent. But when your preference is, and I saw another thing, somebody had put on Medium, that this person was making an argument for universal health care, single-payer health care, because she had type 1 diabetes that she had been diagnosed with when she was like 10 years old. Feel really bad for her. And she had done this little comic. And at about 3/4 of the way down in the comic, there's some guy standing, and he's got like a Patriots shirt. And he says, well, why should I have to pay for your health care? And then the next panel says, well, it's not you paying for my health care. We're all paying for each other. I'm like, hold on. How in the world is that true when you've spent this whole thing saying that if it wasn't for publicly provided health care, you couldn't afford your medicine?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like, so basically you're not paying for my health care because you can't even cover your own health care. Now it's one thing to call on me, right? If you want to say, hey, I'm suffering, I'm struggling, I need some help. Can you help me? And here's the reason why I deserve some help. And not only that, here's what I'm going to do in return. My life is valuable to me. I'm going to do this in return. And that's why you're going to benefit from what it is that I'm going to do. So please help me. Right? People will do that.
Yeah.
But it's another thing to say, if money is not stolen from you and spent on me, something bad is going to happen to me. And I know that for a lot of people, they have a huge, especially when it's you. Of course, we all have a preference to be healthy ourselves. Mm-hmm. We all have a preference to live well ourselves, to live better than we are. But where does that stop? Like, good health is not a right. You don't have a right to good health. Whether it's caused by you or whether it's caused by chance, right? Like, I don't have a right if I'm driving down a country road. Mm-hmm. I don't have a right that a deer won't jump in front of my car.
Right.
I hit the deer, I swerve off the road, and I'm paralyzed. I don't have a right that the deer doesn't come out. Sometimes a deer just fucking pops out. Mm-hmm. Like, what I have a right is that you don't purposely try to make me crash. Like, that's a right. That's exclusive. That's not initiating violence against me. Mm-hmm. But if shit happens, and if shit happens to someone else, you don't have a right to take from me because something bad. I understand something bad happened to you. Mm-hmm. I feel for you that something bad happened to you. But by the same token, it's like, well, what if something bad happened to me? Mm-hmm. Like, what do I lose because I have to pay for your insulin? How does your preference for insulin overcome, even if it's my preference for a new car this year? Mm-hmm. Like, maybe by me having that new car, maybe that new car will save my life at some point. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Maybe that new car will allow me to save someone else's life at some point. I don't know. You don't know. And that's the reason why principles over preferences. So we're dealing with the same sort of situation with Chelsea Manning. Same situation. We're living in a world where preferences are being pushed and there's no thought for principle. None.
Yeah. It's backwards.
Which brings me to, although our country is founded on principle, even our president, in discussing, and we're going to talk about CNN and we're going to talk about Trump now, but what I want to start with is, this is preferences on both sides of the aisle, and you can tell where people's heads are. Again, I'm no supporter of Trump. I think CNN is fucking way off here, but Trump is just as far off when it comes to principles and preferences. Let's do news number one.
I will say that CNN has really taken it too seriously, and I think they've hurt themselves very badly, very, very badly. And what we want to see in the United States is honest, beautiful, free, but honest press. We want to see fair press. I think it's a very important thing. We don't want fake news.
What we want to see in the United States is we want to see, keep that phrase in your head. What we want to see is honest news, not fake news, fair news. What we want to see, in other words, that's what he wants to see. That's a preference. Don't say we. Don't say fucking we. Because clearly what CNN wants to see is exactly what CNN is producing. Otherwise, they wouldn't produce it. So it's not we, it's you. What you want to see is you want to see press that's favorable to you. You want to see press that you think in your mind is honest. But the truth of the matter is, no. What we want to see is uncensored press, because that's the principle. The principle is no law abridging the freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. It's not that we want to see an honest and fair religion. We want to see honest and fair speech. It's not even about that. It's not even about wanting to see speech at all. It's just like, if you're going to speak, you get to speak. If you're going to put something in the press, you get to put it in the press. Now, obviously, there are libel laws, there are slander laws. But outside of that, and even those laws may, on principle, not stand up to the First Amendment. CNN, on the other hand, is actually doing some things, threatening to dox people if they criticize them. This is the CNN dox story. Okay. This is from CNN.com. The Reddit user who initially claimed credit for President Donald Trump's tweet that showed Trump tackling CNN issued an apology Tuesday for the video and other offensive content he posted, one day after CNN identified the man behind the account and attempted to make contact with him. CNN is not publishing Han Asshole Solo's name because he is a private citizen who has issued an extensive statement of apology, showed his remorse by saying he has taken down all his offending posts, and because he said he is not going to repeat this ugly behavior on social media again. In addition, he said his statement could serve as an example to others not to do the same. CNN reserves the right to publish his identity should any of that change. So, Christian, you've basically got now a precedent where the media, anybody that attacks them, they are reserving the right to publicly, or anybody who it is a public forum, for sure.
Yeah.
This person ostensibly was supposed to be anonymous. This person's making satire against them. And what is CNN reserving the right to do? You either apologize for making an extensive apology for making a parody, or we are going to put all of your documents and your identity online, and you know what? Come what may. Come what fucking may. Put a chilling effect. And then yet, just this week, a whole bunch of CNN personnel's shit got released to the press. Got released. They basically got doxxed. And they got all upset. Oh no, these people should be arrested because they're going to bring violence upon. We're scared. We've got security measures and all this. And it's like, yo, man, you just threatened to do that to someone who presented basically another member of the media. Because parody is part of the media. Political cartoons are part of the media. Political commentary and satire is part of the media. And you are public figures, CNN. This guy wasn't even trying to be a public figure. It's not like he even gave it to Trump. It's not like he even posted. He wasn't the one who posted on Trump's Twitter. He posted it on Reddit. You didn't know about it until Trump put it up. Right? So, yeah, it's really... But I do think that a lot of this is a setup. Let's do this shit posting thing. This is Trump versus CNN. This is from Newsweek. How the president is trolling the media into oblivion. The president of the United States of America is a shit poster. It's not an elegant turn of phrase, but it is, I think, the correct terminology to capture a political moment so monstrously stupid that even Jerry Springer finds it embarrassing. To shitpost, according to the scholarly journal Urban Dictionary, is to make utterly worthless and inane posts on an internet message board, particularly those involving memes or low-quality visuals. And the president's latest act of shitposting, tweeting out a video edited to show Trump wrestling and beating up the CNN logo, has flung the 24-hour news network into a week-long controversy involving death threats, claims of blackmail, and a Reddit user who calls himself Han Asshole Solo. It's very hard to imagine having to explain that sentence to a person from 2007, but frankly, it's also pretty hard to explain that sentence to a normal person from 2017 who doesn't spend every waking moment following incremental developments in Trump's blustery war with the media, which probably is healthy. Trump can't win a war against CNN in the courts, but he can continue to troll the network and other media outlets into chaos and disarray. Consider Trump's 2006 battle with the journalist Tim O'Brien, who had published a book alleging that Trump's net worth was far lower than claimed. Trump sued the author for libel, and after a lengthy legal process, the case was eventually dismissed, but Trump was pleased. I spent a couple of bucks on legal fees, he later told the Washington Post, and they spent a whole lot more. I did it to make his life miserable, which I'm happy about. It's not far-fetched to think that Trump feels similarly pleased with himself for bringing chaos to CNN. Jeffrey A. Zucker, the president of the network, has described Trump's behavior as bullying. By casting journalists as villains in his administration, the president makes questions of objectivity even trickier to navigate. As a writer-comedian Sarah Cooper tweeted, journalists aren't supposed to be the story, so by making them the story, Trump automatically makes them look biased in defending themselves. Which, Christian, is very much hampering their ability to deal with the real news, which makes Trump really the winner. He's put them, it's great gamesmanship. It's total game theory. he's put him in a very tough position. He has cast doubt on any reporting that they would do of him. Mm-hmm. And he's gotten them sort of on the back foot and feeling offended, so that actually they are skewing the news. Right. They are painting themselves as his opponent. Mm-hmm. So then when they go to report on shit, instead of actually reporting the news, they report things about Trump, which they then skew, which then, whether or not it actually is fake news, it certainly appears to be fake news, which then feeds the feedback loop, its reflexivity.
Yep.
He's playing the Soros game.
Yep.
He's playing the reflexive game, and he's got CNN going. So, G20 just happened. This was over in Hamburg, Germany. Mainstream media is covering that. What are the big stories to come out of the G20? How much of it is real news? How much of it is fake news? What should have really been focused on, and what was focused on? Well, the thing that was focused on, certainly worldwide, this is from The Guardian, this is the Trump-Putin meeting. Trump-Putin meeting dominates G20 as Russia denies interference in U.S. election. Donald Trump began his highly anticipated first meeting with Vladimir Putin since his election with a direct warning to stop interfering in American elections, the U.S. Secretary of State said on Friday. Reports that Russia intervened to tip the election in Trump's favor have dogged the president since last year. But when the two men met on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Hamburg, Putin denied any involvement. The U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson told reporters, the meeting came against a backdrop of intense diplomacy on topics ranging from Syria, North Korea, climate change, and trade wars, all conducted while Hamburg grappled with violent street protests. The day was dominated, however, by the sheer drama, unpredictability, and unexpected duration of an encounter that lasted 2 hours and 16 minutes, far longer than expected. Tillerson said that halfway through the meeting, Melania Trump entered the room to remind her husband of his schedule, but the meeting went on for another hour. So Trump and Putin having a conversation, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing, right? We would prefer conversations to in person.
Yeah.
It's something that we've talked about a lot. A lot changes when you meet somebody in person.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when there's all this tension.
And when you meet a high-value individual in person, even if you tended to think not so good of them. There's a great movie. I don't know if you've seen it. I believe it's either Elvis Nixon or Nixon Elvis. I think it's Elvis Nixon. And it's about when Richard Nixon and Elvis Presley met each other.
Wow.
It's a true story. And they both, knowing about each other, they both are kind of like, don't like each other, and they kind of begrudgingly go into this meeting because they both want something. And by the time they come out of it, they're like in love with each other. They've got a bromance going on. And it's really funny. But I could totally see that with Trump and Putin. Right? They're two guys who are like, they have very similar personalities in a lot of ways. You know, they're both these kind of strong men, very full of themselves, you know, very well known, certainly worldwide. And here are these two guys that it's like, look, there are not a lot of people who are like us. I'm sure they share a common bond, you know, whatever. It's a long conversation, especially one where it was about to be interrupted. A long conversation is better than a short one, in my mind. But what was really not covered, and what I want to go to, are, especially in light of Chelsea Manning's socialist leanings, in light of all the jobs are going away, which means UBI. Let's start to look at, as this movement goes forward, the anarcho-communists, the socialists, the Antifa, let's look at what these protests look like at the G20. Hamburg, Germany. So they're lighting cars on fire, they're breaking windows of businesses, they're spray painting on the walls. They're all black bloc. Just cars that are on the street, they're just destroying them. Yep, there's one car lit on fire, there's two cars lit on fire. Oh, there's three cars. They're throwing flares inside the cars. It's just someone else's car. Car's on fire. Just some random car on the street. Just somebody just parked their car. Something that I want you to think about. These are the people who are clamoring for single-payer health care. These are the people who are clamoring for universal basic income. These are the people who are clamoring to smash the patriarchy. And when they get en masse, what they do is they go and they destroy property. So, you've got to think, someone who does not respect your property, how likely are they to respect your body, your freedom, your rights, your opinion, if they can't even see their way to leave your car alone that's not threatening them? If they can't even see their way to leave the window of your house or your business alone, do you really believe the person that breaks the window of your car and lights it on fire is going to make sure that your kid gets health care? Or do you think maybe there might be something else going on? And besides, they hate capitalism, right? They hate that there would be capitalist goods and the capitalist system, and they completely reject the fruits of capitalism, right? Well, let's take a look at, they could just break a building. They could just burn it. They don't believe in private property. Oh, until they appropriate that property. Let's look at the looting that went on as well. Here they are. You see the black bloc. Actually, the only people not breaking into this place, this is the grocery store, are the people not in black, not with their heads covered, the black bloc. And look at them. This is how they shop. This is a wonderful metaphor for what you're asking for when you're asking for socialism. Because this is what they believe socialism is. Let someone else build it, let someone else create it, let someone else produce it, and then we will all go in and we will take it. This is what Chelsea Manning means when she says we should make the rich pay. We should make them pay. Chelsea, how do you make them pay? How do you make someone give you their stuff? That's what making them pay looks like in real life. And do you think that those people, when they broke in and they took that stuff, do you think that they were taking it off, they broke in and took it off so they could take it to a homeless shelter? Do you think they were taking it to the poor and needy of Hamburg? Or do you think that they were stealing beer and vodka and taking it home and drinking it? What do you think is more likely? Like, go down to a soup kitchen. Go look at the volunteers at that soup kitchen. Go look at the people who are working hard at charities, and then ask them, when was the last time they broke into a store and stole something? When was the last time they broke the windows of a car and lit it on fire? Because they're the same thing. Respect for property and respect for bodily autonomy, respect for life, liberty, and property is the principle, and it's all related to the same thing. I dig into this in my new book. The manuscript is done. Self-ownership, the foundation of property and morality. I dig into this and show why the two of them are connected. So that's going to be out by the end of the summer for sure. It's already gone off to have the audiobook recorded. John Loth is reading it, so I can't wait to hear how that turns out. So it'll be an audiobook, Kindle, paperback. But it's not just me. I mean, every individualist philosopher fundamentally has written about this. And John Locke, you could just go back to John Locke. So let's look at what CNN decided that they were going to cover. So, Putin meeting, fantastic. Looting, not being covered. Now, while the Putin meeting was going on, something else happened, and that's what CNN decided that they were going to cover. So let's go ahead and see, what did CNN cover? This is Ivanka.
Let's talk about what happened this morning with Ivanka Trump. She briefly took a role, on a critical role, we should say, at the G20 summit. She sat in for her father, President Trump, of course, at a G20 leaders working session this morning. CNN senior White House correspondent Jim Acosta live for us at the summit in Hamburg, Germany. So talk to me about what this role is that she took and you know, how effective was she? How much influence, Jim, do you get a sense that she has there on the global stage?
Well, Chrissy, I think that, first of all, we should point out senior administration officials are downplaying that this was any sort of, big deal. They essentially are saying that the president had to step out for a quick meeting, and so his seat was empty at this table at this World Bank meeting that was going on here at the G20 summit, and that she sat there temporarily while they were talking about some World Bank efforts in Africa, and that was essentially it. And of course, it's a reminder that, you know, when President Trump is abroad, or even when he's dealing with policies on the domestic front, it is a family business at times. And Ivanka Trump is an assistant to the president. She's one of his top advisors, and so this is the deal when you're talking about the Trump White House.
So Ivanka Trump briefly sits in for her father. Can't go back to that. I'll just read it. Ivanka Trump, President Donald Trump's daughter, and one of his top White House aides, briefly took her father's place at a meeting with other world leaders at the G20 summit here in Hamburg on Saturday, causing a stir among Trump critics on social media. A photo of the first daughter sitting next to Chinese President Xi Jinping, British Prime Minister Theresa May, Turkey's Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and German Chancellor Angela Merkel was first tweeted by Svetlana Lukash, who identifies herself on Twitter as a G20 Russian Sherpa, a title given to people who help international delegations at large summits. A senior Trump administration official confirmed that Ivanka Trump had stepped in for her father, but dismissed any suggestion it was improper or unusual. So, Christian, we've got... This is so funny, dude. CNN, Ivanka Trump taking a role, a crucial, critical role, we must say. So what was this role that she took? Yeah, they were talking about World Bank efforts in Africa. And she sat on this panel. World Bank efforts in Africa is a critical role in the Trump administration. That's a critical role in the Trump administration. Okay, CNN. Who is the envoy if it's such a critical role? Why don't you go and tell me the name of the envoy to the World Bank from the United States who specifically deals with issues on Africa? And go. And fucking go. Try to even find it. How quickly can you even find it? If it takes you a half hour of looking to find who the person is that you would even need to email, it's probably not a critical role. It's not a critical role in the administration. I would doubt that Donald Trump even knows the name of that person. But that's what they decide to cover. Oh, the administration is downplaying this. Meaning to say, oh, but we're calling it critical, but the administration's downplaying it. They're clearly lying. He's giving over positions to his family. He's giving over positions to his family. Isn't this terrible? The Trump White House, it's all about family. Hold up. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Because I'm pretty sure that your fucking hero, John Kennedy, gave the Attorney Generalship of the United States appointed to his fucking brother. Bobby Kennedy was the Attorney General under John F. Kennedy. I don't hear them being like, you know what? They're doing it just like the Kennedys. They're like the Kennedys. No, none of his family members have anywhere near a position. None of them have an actual like governmental secretary, cabinet secretary position. Kennedy did. Then Bobby Kennedy was going to run for president after that based on that. Principle.
Yep.
Over preference. Which again, it's like, but when it's our guy who does it, it's fucking great.
Right.
He deserved it. Bobby Kennedy deserved to be there. Really? Really? Well, Bobby Kennedy was an attorney. Okay, he was an attorney. There's lots of fucking attorneys in the country. So you're saying of all the attorneys in the entire country at the time that John F. Kennedy was president, that it just so happens that his little brother would be the most qualified of all the attorneys in the United States, and it had nothing to do with him being his brother.
Jesus.
It was just a sheer fucking coincidence. A sheer coincidence that get me the list of the short list of the 100 most qualified attorneys in the country. Yes, right away, Mr. President. Here's the list. Well, what do you know? Bobby, you're at the top of the list. I am, Jack? Oh my goodness, I had no idea. What a coincidence. And I just happen to be here right now. That's going to work out great. Well, you're already here, so since you're at the top of the list, go ahead, Bobby. You're the Attorney General. Nothing to do with being his family, right? Nothing to do with being his family. Preferences. When it's your fucking hero, I didn't see that. I didn't see that. I didn't see that. When it's the guy who clotheslines the logo.
Yeah.
Now it's a problem. Now, this is how it is in the Trump administration. You've got to know. And remember, Jim Acosta, it's like, Jim, I don't really think that you should be allowed to report on Trump anymore. There's a little bit of a conflict of interest when he was like, called you very fake news. Because remember, it was Jim Acosta where he's like, no, stop talking. Be quiet. Be nice. And the fact that they still let that guy cover Donald Trump says a lot about whether or not they value fairness and impartiality in their organization. Because it's like, look, Jim, we're not going to fire you because it's not your fault that this dude's a douche. It's not your fault that he's a douche, but at the same time, we have a responsibility to our viewers to not have his enemies reporting on what he's doing. And don't you have responsibility to yourself as a news organization? Unless you're not going to call him a correspondent now and you're going to call him like a political commentator. Go ahead, bring him on to give commentary about Trump, to be negative about Trump. That's fine. But like, let us know where well, it's obvious where he's coming from. You can't have somebody tell you to shut up and then think, oh, it's going to be all good.
Yeah, it's almost like there's zero principle and all preference there. It's crazy.
Well, you would think, even from just an economic standpoint, right? If you want to stick around as a news organization, right, and you're going to present yourself as, well, fair and balanced was Fox's thing, right? They even pulled off of that. I don't think they even use that term anymore because everybody knows it's not right. But that just goes to show you, right? Like, if you're going to present yourself as news and not editorial and not opinion, but like, we're going to tell you the news and we're going to tell you what's going on. It's fucking hot in here, dude. We're going to tell you the news and we're going to tell you what's going on. But the people that you have there, just as normal human beings, I'm not mad at Jim Acosta. I'm not angry at him. I don't think he's a bad person for having a bad taste in his mouth about Donald Trump. I would too, had I been put through what he was put through by Donald Trump. But I'd also have to recuse myself. I'd have to be like, look, I hate this guy so much. I hate him so much. I cannot, it's not right for me to be reporting on this guy because I hate him too much. And my job is to report the news. I can't report the news. I'm a human being.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to skew it because I fucking hate him. Yep. That's a principled stand. That's a principled person. Not, let me report on him. Give me the job. Oh yeah, I'll do a good job. Right? Because you have to ask yourself, like, because sometimes the other person's the asshole, and sometimes you're the asshole. But you never know until you step away and you see, right? Because if you step away and then all of a sudden the other person has no problems with that person, guess what? You're the asshole. If you step away and 5 people afterwards are like, yeah, I don't know, I didn't have any problems, then guess what? You're the asshole. At least now you know you're the asshole. You can go back, you can look and say, maybe I could be less of an asshole next time. Where did I mess up?
Yeah, that's a common thing in relationships too.
Oh, it's huge.
Yeah. Like one person's mad at the other, and then the other person gets mad, and all of a sudden they're in this big fight, and it's like, no, just step away for a second. Let everything calm down.
Yeah, you got to step back because all you're doing is you're just escalating the situation.
Yeah.
And with Trump, You know, it's crazy because I've said this from the beginning, and he's got them. The way to deal with Trump is laugh at his buffoonery.
Yeah.
This is what the left has a fatal flaw right now, is that they take themselves way too fucking seriously.
And they're reacting to everything.
Well, because everything's serious, right? It's like, you gotta step back for just a second. It's not that fucking serious. It's a meme, but look where you've taken this thing to. It's affecting your ability to do your fucking job.
Yep.
That's a problem. You need to step back. You need to chill. You need to just, and the more that they do it, the more that they play into it, the more he's going to escalate it. Because you know what? He didn't give a fuck.
No, and he's pretty smart, so I'm sure he's seeing that. He's like, okay, I'm going to...
He loves doing this.
Yeah.
He loves messing with people. He's a troll. Huge troll. So, another story. I don't know if this is necessarily, if there's a huge segue into this. I don't know if it's how good of a transition on this it is, but it's something that I wanted to cover for this week because I've often said that I think the state is going in the direction of the Catholic Church. That it's basically, you're getting into a place where it's more about the pomp and circumstance. It's more about the internal politics.
Yeah.
CNN is so embedded, and the mainstream media is so embedded in the state that they're playing politics as though they were like a political party. You know, they're getting all offended. Oh, he said this, he said this. And the fact that a particular wing, ideological wing of the left is defending CNN, and it happens to be the same wing of people who are anti-corporation and anti-capitalist, who are defending a capitalist corporation.
Yeah, that's...
that has heavy political influence, because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But there are some things that are undefendable, and that is news number 2. So, I want you to think about this. When you go and you defend based on your particular ideology, your particular belief set, when you defend an institution that is acting outside of principle, that is acting immorally, when you defend them because they seem to share your ideology or they are against the things that you are against. So, those who are against, who are anti-abortion, who side with the Catholic Church, based on that. And we know there have been problems, but I think it's starting to come to a head. So let's see this Vatican thing. 2 top Vatican officials charged for sex crimes. This is from Activist Post. The Vatican is being rocked by scandals. 2 high-ranking members of the congregation have been arrested for lewd crimes, including one alleged to have sexually assaulted children. The Pope's chief financial advisor, Cardinal George Pell, and another unknown top priest have been arrested. Pell stands accused of possession of child pornography, and the unknown priest is accused of hosting a drug-fueled sex orgy party. Last month, Pell, one of Australia's most senior Catholics, was charged with multiple counts of historical sexual assault offenses, according to police, The Independent reported. Pell will appear in an Australian court to face multiple charges of historical sexual assault offenses, Victoria State Police Deputy Commissioner Shane Paul said. Pell is the highest-ranking official to ever be charged in the church's long-running sexual abuse scandals. He has also previously faced allegations that he mishandled cases of clergy abuse when he was Archbishop of Melbourne and later Sydney. Now he is under the microscope for his own alleged abuse. So, cardinals are supposed to be co-equal. The Pope is the most highly elevated cardinal. Yeah. Right? The Pope comes from out of the cardinals, is selected by the conclave of cardinals. The Pope's the chief financial advisor to the Vatican, this cardinal in Australia, finally they're going to charge somebody. They're going to charge somebody in these Catholic Church sex scandals. But the fact of the matter is that it's at this high of a level. Now, whatever's going to happen in the courts, in the governments, fine. But for people to deny what's going on at this fucking point is the equivalent of somebody being put in jail by the state and denying that the state is an immoral actor and is stealing from people to do immoral shit. Like, these are the people who are telling you, do X and you go to hell. Mm-hmm. You better come and confess your sins to me. Meanwhile, I'm going to go and do the most lewd and immoral shit you could possibly imagine by my own standards. Not even by somebody else's standards. I'm telling you, here are the standards. This is going to send you to hell if you do it. Then I go and do it. So clearly it's one of two things. Either, and because it's so widespread, either, and this is the principle, either all of these people who are telling you that you're going to hell for these actions, either every single one of them believes that those actions will send you to a hell and believes in hell, mm-hmm. and yet are unafraid of it, or they absolutely know that they're bullshitting you, that they're lying to you, there is no hell, and they're not going to it, and therefore they can do whatever they want.
Yep.
And what are the chances? What, again, are the chances? So, in either case, these people are lying and committing immoral acts. Mm-hmm. Well, in either case, they're committing immoral acts because they're getting caught, right?
Yeah.
Immoral acts by their own standards. Now, people who commit immoral acts by their own standards, are they notorious for being truth tellers, or are they maybe notorious for being liars?
They're liars.
And yet, people can't break out.
Fear.
Indoctrination. Mm-hmm. It's very, very fucking effective.
Yeah.
It's very, very effective indoctrination. And the indoctrination in schools that taxation is not theft, that we're paying our fair share, that it's for the common good, this form of collectivism, that you shouldn't fight the IRS. Go with it. And those who fight the IRS are immoral. I don't believe that. That's actually our news story number 3, because we have been following this story. This is Coinbase, who, to go back and give some history, Coinbase is, of course, one of the larger exchanges. Coinbase is very important to the cryptocurrency community because Coinbase is one of the easiest ways to move from either Bitcoin, Ethereum, or Litecoin, and to move to actual fiat dollars and vice versa because it's attached to your bank account. The IRS has been pretty much the last 7 months has had this John Doe summons. They want all of the records. They want to trace everybody's transactions, attach them to their bank accounts. Coinbase has been fighting this. Some of the anonymous users have been fighting it. So let's take a look at this Coinbase story. Something happened. It's hard to know what exactly happened because it's not all public, but this is from Fortune. The Internal Revenue Service suggested it will scale back a sweeping probe of more than 1 million customer accounts at the popular digital currency exchange Coinbase, saying it will no longer seek password and security settings for the accounts. The concession came during a legal skirmish last week between the IRS and anonymous Bitcoin buyers at Coinbase, who are asking for the right to intervene in the case. DOJ trial attorney Amy Matchison said at a court hearing before the U.S. Magistrate Judge Jacqueline Scott Corley Thursday that the IRS has been in talks with Coinbase about narrowing its request to only items the agency would need to look for unreported income, reported the Recorder, a legal site that reported on the hearing. The controversy began last year when the IRS demanded to see all of Coinbase's customer account activity from 2013 to 2015, a time when Bitcoin's value soared from $13 to over $1,100. It's currently worth around $2,600. The agency has stated that only 802 people declared gains or losses related to Bitcoin in 2015. That part is actually pretty interesting, that you see how voluntary the taxes really are. We know way more than 802 Americans have made money on Bitcoin. Only 802, well, it said only 802 people declared gains or losses related to Bitcoin. Some of those people could have reported losses, so basically took a deduction. Who knows how many people reported gains or how much they actually did. And some of them, it might be that they reported those gains because they're like individuals who are heavily audited by the IRS, right? It says 802 people. Some of those could have been businesses too. So, I mean, they say persons. Technically, a corporation is a person, right? A business. Yeah, that's how people, if you want to see what this whole thing is going to look like, if you want to, and that's why I'm like, I don't tell people don't pay taxes. I don't tell people that. Taxation is theft, for sure.
Yeah.
But just use cryptocurrency. And then let's see. Like, when you can't be held accountable for not doing something, economics in the market says people won't do it. If there's no accountability, they won't fucking do it. If no individual is accountable, when something goes wrong, they won't do it. Which is exactly why Thomas Sowell and to an extent Hans Hermann Hoppe in his book Democracy, the God That Failed said, this is why the state doesn't work. This is why universal health care can't work. Because you think you're going to get care, right? This person with the type 1 diabetes, she thinks she's going to be made healthy by this. But the question you have to ask is, who is on the hook if it doesn't happen for you?
Yeah.
Who is on the hook if you don't get your insulin? Right? And you have no other option of anywhere else to go. Let's say it's universal basic income. Let's say you're relying on your universal basic income. Let's say your check doesn't come. Let's say there's a problem in the system. Universal basic income, you totally went for that. You've been getting your check. All of a sudden your check doesn't come. There's a problem in the system. What do? Call the number. Wait, we're sorry, but due to higher than expected call volume, wait times are 5 to 7 hours. So you wait 2, 3, 4 hours, walking around, got to recharge your phone. Then all of a sudden, click, it just hangs up.
Shit.
You got to call back. Or you go down to the office. You wait in a line. Then you show up. Well, we just don't have a record of you being here. Maybe there's a problem with the system. Well, now you got to call this number. Now you got to go through this. Because there's no market incentive to take care of you.
Yeah.
There's no market, I mean...
i.e. the DMV.
The DMV! Like, how difficult is it for you to go and just change your address on your registration? How long do you have to wait? Okay, that's the address on your registration. Now think about surgery for cancer.
Shit.
All right?
Yeah.
Now think about emergency services. Because they don't care. Why would they? Whose fault is it if you die? You can't sue. Who's going to sue? Who do you sue? Who's going to judge it?
Yeah.
The state's going to judge it. It's a state judge. Who are you suing? You're suing the state. What are the chances of that going through?
Yeah. But wait, Apple's got an app for it.
But they're not allowed to bring the app to market.
Why?
Because that would be competition.
Yep.
There's no competition for the DMV. You're not allowed to open your own private DMV and put private registrations on cars. The Apple registration, that's not going to work. Bro, you drive around with the Apple registration, the cops are going to pull you over and be like, no, your car is not registered.
If you can't innovate,
Regulate. So let's talk a little bit about regulations with our guest, Michael Boldin. Let's go to break, and then we're going to come back with Michael Boldin, the executive director of the 10th Amendment Center. Just go ahead and bring him on, dude. Welcome back to the Vin Armani Show. We are streaming live on YouTube at youtube.com/Vin Armani. We are also on Twitter and Periscope. At Vin Armani is my handle there. And we are streaming on the Facebook page of our content partner, Activist Post. That's facebook.com/Activist Post. So it's the second hour. Before we get into our interview, I just want to talk to you a little bit about counter markets. Counter markets at countermarkets.com, trends and strategies for maximum freedom. The June, wait, is it July? The July, it's that hot. The July issue is out. It's awesome. It's awesome. This is by far, I think, our best issue that we have put together. It just keeps getting better and better. I want to thank all of the people who are subscribers. We are starting in now with some extras for those people who both have gone and signed up and gotten their free issue, and for those people who are subscribers. Our editor, Jeff Paul, put together a great initial coin offering report that was sent out to subscribers for an insurance, a blockchain insurance company that went out in addition this month to the newsletter. And so we're going to try to keep these up as these initial coin offerings come out on the blockchain. The ability to invest in those and invest fast is a very new thing, and because of that, there's not a lot of barriers to entry. There are a lot of bad investments out there, but we're looking for the good ones. And we're going to tell you about the hidden gems, and we're also going to be doing reports on some of the bigger ICOs and telling you why they either are or are not a great buy. So go and check that out. Definitely stay tuned for even more extras. If you haven't gone and gotten your first issue for free, you can go to countermarkets.com. Just give us your email. We're going to send it right over to you. And if you decide to subscribe using cryptocurrency, you're going to get a massive discount. So thank you to all the people who have done that. Thank you to all the crypto savages for that one. And with that, let's get over to our guests. Our guest today is Michael Boldin. Michael Boldin is the founder and executive director of the 10th Amendment Center. Michael has a full schedule, working as senior editor of the center's website, writes a regular column, fields media interviews, and travels the country to speak to crowds about sticking to the Constitution. Every issue, every time, with no exceptions, no excuses. While media and activists alike seemingly want to pigeonhole him into a political category, his viewpoints and positions defy the standard categories and political parties. Michael Boldin, welcome to the Vin Armani Show.
Boom. Awesome to be here. Thanks, Vin.
So this is very exciting for me. I am a big buff, and sometimes I annoy my friends with how in love with the Bill of Rights I am, how unique it is. I think a lot of people do not appreciate, especially my anarchist friends are like, the Constitution, man, fuck it. It's just
it's a slave document,
piece of paper, slave document. And they're like, just burn it, throw it out. And I'm like, hold up. The Bill of Rights, though? The Bill of Rights, though? Like, that's a pretty amazing and unique document. When did you fall in love with, or when did you and how did you gain interest in that particular section of the document?
Oh man, we're going to go into that story?
Let's do it.
Okay, so well, I originally started out as a communist, and
is this true, or are you just being facetious?
No, real story. I was a communist. I remember years ago, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but there was an airline bailout sometime in the 80s.
Yeah.
And my initial thought on the airline bailout, my gut instinct was, oh man, if the government's giving them money, why don't they just own the airline? And I thought about that about everything. My viewpoint about the role of government was that government should run everything, own everything. And maybe I was just trying to be an outsider or something, but I really did identify as a communist for many years when I was younger. I guess it's cool when you're in your 20s or something. But over the years, I participated in anti-war activism right after the Iraq War started. I just started learning, reading more. I discovered Harry Browne, who was a libertarian writer and presidential candidate for a number of terms, I think 96 and 2000. Mm-hmm. And I just started learning that, you know, just because you stop war doesn't mean you have to start advocating for taking the money used on foreign policy and war and put it into programs at home domestically. And I just started learning that no matter what you did with government, it generally was either a ripoff or a lie or it didn't work. And I think Harry had a great book called Why Government Doesn't Work, very easy to read, and teach people why all these programs either go way over budget, they never do what they say they're going to do, or they're just a total ripoff.
So let's talk about specifically then the 10th Amendment. I think we have, Christian, do you have just the copy for the people who aren't familiar with the 10th Amendment specifically. So you founded the 10th Amendment Center. You're the executive director. So, and here it is. The power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, or reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. Okay, what does that mean, Michael Boldin?
Okay, short version, the feds are authorized to do a certain amount of stuff. It's really about 33, 34, 35 things that are listed out in the Constitution, and everything else is reserved to the states or to the people as they deem fit. I think the best way to put it is, at 10th Amendment Center, we're guns and weed.
Right.
Well, because, I mean, if you think about it, like, when you're talking about if someone's a conservative or a liberal, you might find a conservative who agrees with you on one issue, for example, on the right to keep and bear arms, kind of. But then on the other side, on the liberals, you'll find that they'll say, okay, yeah, of course we want weed or hemp farming or something like that. But for us, we believe in decentralization all the time. The more decentralized, the closer you are to the individual. The closer you are to the individual, the greater chance you have of individual liberty expanding and growing.
Okay, so are you?
No.
I like to make these separations. For me, it's very like when I have these conversations, I want clear definitions of where people are coming from. So you sound like you're talking secession, but then at the same time, you're the 10th Amendment Center, so you still want a federal government? Is the federal government legitimate? So is the 10th Amendment legitimate? Square that one for me. Help me to understand
We're
that.
getting a little ANCAP-y here. That's cool. That's cool. I've read a lot of Hoppe. I've read a lot of Rothbard. So
well, no, I don't want to come at it from any particular ideological standpoint. I want to know how do you come at it? I want to understand, because this is something you're passionate about. This is something you're an expert in. This is, you know what I mean? This is something that you've devoted your life to. So I want to know, are we saying yes to the federal government, or are we saying no to the federal government?
In general, it's kind of like Tinder for government. It's always swipe left. Okay. So in almost every situation, we're saying no to the federal government because there's very little that it's supposed to be doing. So let's say they're establishing post roads. That doesn't mean, in fact, that actually doesn't mean every single road. It only means interstate highways.
Got it.
I mean, they wouldn't be too dangerous in that situation. And if we ever got it to that point, I mean, who's we anyways? But if things ever got to that point, I think some smarter people would be able to figure out how to go to the next level if that's what society wanted to do at that point. But I think the things are so far off from that to discuss whether or not, I mean, philosophically, we could talk about whether the federal government is legitimate or not. I think it does exist, so people need to deal with it how they're going to deal with it at this point.
Well, maybe then let's not come at it from like philosophically or ideological. Let's come at it constitutionally, right? Like I think where I struggle with the Constitution and should we be, and I'm a big Ninth Amendment guy myself, right?
That's cool.
Right? So my question is, should we be embracing the Constitution, and should we be fighting for a more Ron Paul style, let's be constitutional literalists? Like, I've been listening to a lot of Antonin Scalia lately, and I'm like, I never really thought of myself. Right.
He's so-so.
Well, I never have thought of myself as a conservative per se, but I do like the idea of like, well, I think that maybe we should take laws literally. Like, we should write them. We should think about how we write them, because we should think if we're going to write these laws, they're going to be enforced, and like that's what a judge should be there to do, perhaps. So I guess my question is, should we be looking to the Constitution and saying, hey, we're doing this thing wrong? Or should we say the Constitution can't be done right, the federal government has already gone too far, and let's use the mechanisms within the Constitution to sort of mitigate that by going to like a states' rights sort of situation?
Well, I think it's some of both. For example, I think it really depends on the person. I'm not one to tell people, like, this is the way you should approach things. So certainly there are going to be people who see the Constitution as a religious document. Right. They take it very strongly. And for them, to learn what the rules of government are supposed to be, what the federal government is supposed to be authorized to do. That can empower them to take action, to actually resist or take action against the federal government when they go beyond those limits. For people who think the Constitution itself is a joke document, that doesn't mean you can't employ the same strategies. Right. For example, in a great speech back in the late 90s, I think it was 97, for the Mises Institute, Hoppe had a speech called What Must Be Done. They probably have it available as a free ebook at this point. But what he said was for the libertarian, and this is the Hoppe style, we're talking about a voluntarist at this point. He said, as things stand today, and I don't think they've gotten any better since the late 90s, probably far worse, but his advice was stop helping in the enforcement of each and every law. He was basically saying we should have 1,000 independent city-states, for example, and whether you're having an independent city-state or a state in itself, or you're just doing that de facto through what we call nullification, rejecting, resisting, and saying no to federal overreach, it's the same approach, at least in today's game.
So, okay, so let's talk about nullification, because this is certainly something that comes up when we're talking about the 10th Amendment. I know that many libertarians bring up this idea of nullification, but it seems that every time I hear it brought up, especially in the mainstream media, it's like the word nullification happens, and then it's like, well, thank you very much, it's time for us to get, and it's like, hold up, wait, what did this person just say? So why don't you help the people out who have heard this before and are like, I don't even know what that is, but it's clearly something that's messing up the mainstream media, and it's messing up the statists who are not wanting the conversation to happen. Give us a breakdown of what nullification is, where this idea comes from, what makes it legitimate, etc.
Well, I could do it in one word, and it's weed. Weed. I mean, there's really no better way to describe what happens than to see it play out in practice. Back in 1996, here in my home state of California, voters passed what was called Proposition 215, the Compassionate Use Act, authorizing the use of marijuana supposedly for certain limited medical purposes, even though the federal government said, oh, you can't do that. And in fact, I don't know if you recall this, but I had just moved to LA a year earlier, and I thought it was really strange that this was coming up because, of course, I was still a believer in government ownership of everything, or maybe I was in a partial transition at that time. But I know that 3 different presidents, one current one and 2 previous, had come to California to campaign against this. They basically said supremacy clause. The federal government says this plant is illegal, and it doesn't matter what you stupid people in California say about it, you aren't authorized to do it. Well, but that didn't really stop the people from doing it anyways. They voted to legalize it, and then more importantly, the market. So you can have a vote, you can have a law passed, you can do all this stuff on a state or a local level, but if it isn't for actions of people, we can talk about Mises's human action, for example. The only way this gets put into practice is when people, the market, says, you know what, we want to do this anyways. And today, the last report that I saw, the estimate was that there are about 1,700 marijuana dispensaries in the city of Los Angeles alone. That's more than Starbucks and 7-Eleven combined. So I mean, there's no way that the federal government can stop people and the market when enough people say no to their so-called prohibitions or mandates or whatever they want to shove down our throats.
Okay. So this is the place where, and I'm glad that I have you on, because I think that you can help me to at least get a better grasp on. I hope
that's a lot of pressure, man. I don't know.
So weed, I think I get, right?
Okay.
And I think most people get, okay, there's the principle. We should be able to put this into our bodies.
Yep.
Great. Fantastic. And it seems like in that case, the states, for the most part, the trajectory of the states is to move away from where the federal government is. The federal government's in the more immoral place.
Yes.
Right? So the states are moving towards the more morally consistent and logically and rationally consistent place. They're still, in a lot of them, especially here now, they're still off in a lot of ways, but it's more preferable than just completely saying, absolutely
everyone
not.
Goes to jail.
Everybody goes to jail, all of this, right? So, and there are trade-offs, as Thomas Sowell says, there are trade-offs, right? So there's no solutions, it's a trade-off. I'd love to see just pure decriminalization. But, so here's the question that I have for you, and I'm going to frame it with another amendment, which is the 14th Amendment, right? So throw this up, and I want to get your thoughts on this. Throw this up. So, all persons born or naturalized in the United States, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, are citizens of the United States and of the state where they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Now, that was ratified in 1868. That was basically what made it so that supposedly everybody could vote and there were no more slaves. That supposedly ended the slaves. But it also, the court decided, it also did this thing called incorporation. And
like 50 years later.
Right, like in the 1920s, right? So
yes.
That the idea was, before that time, and I think that this is something that a lot of people don't know, that until the 1920s, the Bill of Rights was not always assumed to apply to the states. So, for instance, if a state didn't have a specific clause in their state constitution that said, we won't make a law abridging free speech or religion or the press, that in theory, the state could enforce all of California, the only legal religion is X. In all of California, the only press that can exist is X. In all of California, this type of speech, this type of speech, this type of speech is not allowed. You're not allowed to have guns, all of this. So my question is, this brings up, certainly in the case of weed, the people have decided in various states that, yes, we should be allowed to have access to weed. The federal government says no. But in the case of something like freedom of the press or free speech or religion, I think that's maybe an important one now, where it seems like there would be the potential for certain states to say, oh, this doesn't actually apply to us, and Islam is illegal in this state. Isn't that...
Is there a state constitution that authorizes that? I don't think so.
Is there a state... Well, the question is, I think that there are quite a few state constitutions that don't have a clause for freedom of religion in them because it's in the Constitution.
No, I think that most of the states probably would have very similar Bill of Rights. Illinois is a good example of closer to what you're talking about, where there is no real protection for the right to keep and bear arms in the Illinois Constitution.
Okay.
And Illinois is on gun rights is pretty awful. And in fact, I would say every state really is pretty awful. It's just varying degrees of how much permission you're having to get from government to be able to defend yourself and your family. So yes, one can definitely make an argument that there are going to be localities that are going to do bad things. But if we were just to look at the society that we live in today, I don't think there's a very large percentage of people who believe in pure freedom the way that we're talking about it here. So you're always going to have those people that are going to try to violate rights. Here in California, it's pretty obvious. Very few people believe in liberty, although I'm noticing my neighbors are very interested in my work after all these years now that Trump's in office. But, I mean, all of a sudden everybody's saying, hey, we should go get a drink and talk about this thing. But the thing is, you can't force liberty on people. To have like a libertarian dictator saying, okay, you're going to be free, you're going to have free speech, I think is just as dangerous as saying, you're going to have no freedom. The idea of selling it on a local level or a state-by-state level, like we've seen with weed. Arkansas just voted to legalize medical marijuana. I think it's because over the years, people have learned what happened in the market, that the world didn't come to an end. So I think it's really important to start from the bottom up, to have a real grassroots and like an organic growth of these things. And that's the way people learn, not just through philosophy or through books, but through seeing it play out in practice. So could Little Rock, Arkansas, just now that we're talking about Arkansas, have more protections for free speech, or just have no restrictions on the press, for example? And then maybe another city says, oh, wow, that actually is working pretty good. We should try that. And then it grows to another state and goes on and on and on. The opposite can happen as well. So if you talk about, for example, socialist or government-run healthcare, you can look to Canada and see, and I say this to my friends, my Green Party friends, for example, who want to force a government single-payer system on the whole country. I say, you know what, that's not the way to do it. No matter what you believe, forcing your way on an entire geographic area is really a bad choice, because it's not going to work over time. Eventually, you're going to find people who resist it. So, for example, in Canada, it was a provincial law. And you know what? Other people, whether you think it's good or bad, one province to the next, they decided to do this until it just kind of covered the whole country. I don't agree with government-run healthcare, but if that's the way society wants to be, I think it's incumbent upon us to teach them that that's not necessarily a good choice.
So you know, we've been talking in the past several weeks quite a bit on this show about principles versus preferences, and I think that I'm getting this basic idea that the federal government is supposed to be very, very, and tell me if I've got this sort of where the 10th Amendment centers at. The federal government is supposed to be very, very, very limited. Yep. And if anything, the positive role that it can play is to sort of enable the free movement of people and goods between states and locales that are all experimenting in the different things that the people want. And through that experimentation, some will be successful, some will not, and the ones that aren't will start to mimic the ones that are successful, and over time, the culture will change. But if the federal government starts saying, you may not do this, may not do this, may not do this, that it actually limits that sort of progress. I mean,
yeah,
is that
kind of, it's like a market response.
Right.
The market is not going to actually have enough information if one system is forced upon us. So, you know, I would love to see things change overnight, but, you know, 150 years of growth of government, and we could just call it tyranny, really, it's not going to be changed overnight. We're in the early stages, I think, of growing the opportunity for more liberty in this country, in the world, for people. And obviously the internet is a big part of this, but unless people actually see how it plays out in practice, it's going to be very difficult. I gave a keynote speech at PorcFest a few years ago, the 10th anniversary. I was a fill-in, so they didn't necessarily ask me. I was a backup to Lou Rockwell, who couldn't make it. But basically what I said was, you know, it's really great that people read a lot of books, but we have to stop reading books and putting things into practice. I gave an example of this 23-year-old kid here who lives in San Bernardino. I wish I remembered his name, but he was working for San Bernardino city government, and this is the second poorest city government in the country. And he started noticing that the city could not provide the so-called services that they could provide to people anymore. So he and his friends decided to open a marijuana dispensary locally. And what they did before they opened it was they started knocking on doors in their neighborhood, and they said to people, you know what, the city isn't doing this, 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 this. We're going to take a percentage of our income at the marijuana dispensary and provide some of these things. I don't know how much of it they ended up doing because I lost contact with it, but I do know for a fact that at one point in time they actually substituted for the government Thanksgiving holiday for the poor. They provided their own meal. So this is really, I mean, you could call it agorism, you could call it all kinds of different things, but really people then learn by that experience, like, oh wow, we don't need government to provide blank. And the more that people actually do that and put it into practice, I think the less likely they are going to be to rely on government to do whatever that is.
So we've got the street level then. So would you say that that is the approach, is the agorist approach, or are there some things that we can do on a political and governmental level? Like, is it so far gone at the federal level that there's no flipping and turning this thing around? Okay. I feel the same way, by the way. I feel the same way.
I don't call politicians. I don't like going to Washington, D.C. I hate the airport there on top of it. I try to forget that the 202 area code ever exists. I've never voted for any of these people. I just really want nothing to do with them because they are, I mean, if someone was great. I actually tried to vote for Ron Paul a few years ago, but my vote was kind of thrown out. They said I wasn't registered. So technically I tried to vote once in 2008, but I just don't trust them. They've killed millions of people around the world. At every turn, they try to rip us off. They devalue the currency. They're screwing with us constantly. I don't want to go to those people to fix any problems. And that's one of the arguments I tell my friends on the left when you start talking about things like government-run healthcare. Why would I want the same organization that has killed millions of people in Iraq and elsewhere around the world, why do I want to put them in charge of something that's so important to me and my family, and that's decisions over my own health? And that I think that applies to just about everything, whether it's self-defense or anything in between.
So we were speaking earlier about, Christian and I were, about this little kind of comic strip that I had seen that this woman put up on Medium, who had she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when she was 10 years old, and she was trying to, it was for single payer kind of universal health care and like keep my Obamacare and all of this, because otherwise me and many people like me are going to die. What do you say to the people if we're talking about healthcare? Because I mean, that's it. I think that's an important place to start. It certainly is the third rail of Canadian politics, right? So,
right,
because we know once it's there, it's there, right? And it's one of those where it's like that is like that's the tentacles of the state with full grasp around people, right? That's the one where they're like, oh, you're gonna leave the state, you're gonna all die in the streets, right? That's the propaganda. So, what do you say to the people who have the fear that, well, if we don't do this, I don't think that the people around if we leave it to the people, I don't have faith and I don't believe that the people around in my community won't just let me die.
I think, first of all, it's very sad because that's the way a lot of people think.
Right.
If I leave self-defense, my healthcare choices, whatever, to individuals are too dumb to make their own decision. And I think that's a huge thing to overcome. And that's why I think it's going to take a long time for liberty to really take hold, because you have to overcome all these years of government-run schooling. I went to government schools, and the first thing that I could take out of that, I started at a Catholic school in my early years, and when I went to a Catholic school, I learned that Catholicism was the solution to virtually every problem that I could ever face. And
really? Go figure. At a Catholic school, they would teach you that Catholicism is the solution? Oh.
So what's going to happen at a government school? When I went to government schools, the solution was always government is the solution to every single problem I could ever think of. And that's the way I came into the world. Like, as an adult, I thought government was going to fix everything. And I think these examples, I think they're heroes. People like that kid that's 23-year-old in San Bernardino. This is a hero. This is someone who said, I'm going to do it my own way. And then there's another guy named Nataka White in Vermont. In 2013, they passed a bill to legalize hemp farming. And even when the governor signed that bill, he specifically added a signing statement that said, oh, this is still going to be illegal under federal law. So people should be aware of that risk. So this guy, Nataka White, he couldn't get seeds to grow his hemp because the DEA blocks importation. So what did he do? He illegally imported a package of seeds from France and started his own garden. So he was interviewed on NPR about that. I think it was early 2014. And they said, well, what do you think of the risks? And his response was, we understand the risks, and we're willing to go forward in starting and pioneering this new industry. This is also another hero because liberty takes risk. Dr. Ibrahim Deplasand was told by the FDA, he came up with a treatment to deal with a type of cancer that took the life of Steve Jobs. The FDA said he couldn't use it in Texas, but the Texas legislature passed this bill called a Right to Try Act that said, you know what, if someone is going to die, they have a right to try something, even if the federal government says they can't. So between the state of Texas and this doctor in Texas, they started treating people anyways. 86 people that the federal government would have let die. Who cares? We don't care if you even have something that might work. It's working in Europe or in other countries right now. We don't care. We're going to let you die. But they did it anyway. So it's going to take not just individuals. I think it's a kind of a combination. It's individuals, it's businesses, it's states. It's basically just kind of moving things more locally. And as that happens, I think liberty has a far better chance than relying on Washington, D.C. to protect us from itself, really, is what we're talking about.
Well, you know, I hear this, and when you say, you know, relying on Washington, D.C. to protect us from Washington, D.C., I hear this, and I think to most people, when they hear the idea of states' rights, and it immediately kind of devolves into secession, let's secede. And I've had an issue with people who are straight up like, let's just secede, because I feel like, well, I think the state, especially a big state like California or Texas, if it was to secede tomorrow, would pretty much just step in to the vacuum of whatever powers the federal government had. It would just grab those powers, and now there's no counterbalance. But I almost feel like what you're saying is, here's the federal government, and there is this lever, this counterbalance of state legislatures and governors who, in a way, are responding to the people being against the federal government, who are able to to act as a competitive force against the federal government in some ways. I mean, that there's a certain market action to there being those state competitors, that the states competing with themselves, the states sort of going against the federal government, and that there's some social cred and some social value of the legislatures and the governors who do that, right? That you can actually gain some social capital by doing that. I mean, talk to us a little bit about that, where do you stand on the secession issue, or do you think that there is some value in the shitty federal government being there from a pragmatic standpoint of us being able to do you understand what I'm asking?
Oh, I'm totally getting where you're going. Okay. So, like, just by having that kind of bad guy in Washington, D.C., it actually encourages these local people to do something. I think you're absolutely onto something, because so, for example, on weed is a good example.
Yes.
You're going to find, or privacy even, you're going to find that the federal government wants to do things one way, and you can see politicians locally saying, okay, well, we're not going to do it like that because the federal government is doing this. So there is some of that, but that doesn't mean that's the only way that it plays out, because really when you get down to it, the state governments are horrible as well.
Yes.
They just are limited in size and resources, which makes them less dangerous.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you for saying that.
I mean, just in case it isn't obvious to anybody, they're really bad. And I go through, one of the things that I do for my work is I monitor state legislation, generally between the months of November and about now, really in June, it really slows down. That's when the states are in session in most localities. And I would say 999 out of 100 bills that are filed by state legislators are total crap. They're really evil. They like all the things that they want to control. But every now and then you find something. So, for example, State Senator May Beavers in Tennessee, I think she might even be running for governor. She has a piece of legislation. They're in a 2-year session in Tennessee. She has a piece of legislation that would, in essence, make Tennessee a sanctuary state for gun rights.
Interesting.
So, I mean, we haven't even talked about immigration, but that's a big issue these days. But she's taking what's going on in the sanctuary cities and saying, oh, you know what, I can learn from that. Why don't we put that same thing into practice on guns and say that the bill basically just says the state will not provide any resources, manpower, or assistance to help enforce federal gun control measures. And this includes the National Firearms Act of 1934, the Gun Control Act of 1968, its amendments in 86. So you can take these types of principles and say, you know what, let's take a hands-off approach. This is what I was talking about, what Hoppe said is the right way for libertarians, but it's also the exact same way that the Constitution guy, James Madison, said that people should deal with federal overreach in a paper called Federalist 46. He said we should use a refusal to cooperate with officers of the Union. And that was his advice. The guy credited for really writing most, I mean, it's not really true, but he's credited as the father of the Constitution. Obviously, he kind of knows how things work. And he said, this is what you should do. Hoppe said the exact same thing. And the more that people take a hands-off approach on federal mandates or laws or prohibitions, the better off that liberty is going to be.
Great. So I'm glad that you brought up immigration, and I'm glad that you brought up hands-off at the same time, because obviously this is a very strong ongoing debate between libertarians, particularly those that lean a little more towards the ANCAP side. This is obviously the debate of immigration, open and closed borders. Myself, as a principled individual, I say, look, I'm looking for a stateless society. I'm against violent coercive force. Both open borders as a government policy and closed borders as a government policy are both the imposition of violent coercive. A lot of people can't get their head around that idea, right? The closed border people are like, you're advocating open borders. The open borders people are like, oh, you're advocating closed borders. I'm like, actually,
you're advocating private property.
Exactly. So can we talk about how that fits in with the idea of states' rights, if we're saying that or are we talking about states' rights? Like, that's the thing, the states or the people, like, where is the separation on that? And maybe we could talk about it through the vein of immigration. Where does that work in terms of if we're looking at the Constitution and the 10th Amendment?
I think it's a great example. Weed, to me, is a great example because we've seen so much success. And only in recent years have we started to study the immigration issue more closely. And a lot of people talk about these so-called immigration sanctuary cities, whether positive or negative, but they point out that there's 300 or 400 so-called immigration sanctuary cities. And what is that? It's basically that the locality has a policy in place that says they will not help the federal government, ICE, for example, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, enforce a specific range of federal immigration, civil immigration laws. Most cities basically just take a hands-off approach on what's called immigration detainer requests. When DHS says, okay, you know, if someone's come up in our system that you've arrested and we think they're here in the country in violation of federal immigration laws, we want you to hold them even after. So let's say someone was picked up for shoplifting. They're going to be in prison for 30 days. The federal government, because they're so inefficient and bureaucracy is nasty, they only reach out to the local government maybe on day 29 and says, we'll have a guy there in 4 days.
Right.
Hold him. Well, the local policy says we're not going to hold someone beyond their release date, even if the federal government asks. Now, some cities take a stronger approach. San Francisco, for example, they just don't use any resources to help in the enforcement of federal immigration law. Well, no one, pro or con, no one is saying that these policies are not affecting federal immigration law. No one is saying that. I don't hear anybody saying that this isn't working, whether you like it or not. So our view is really straightforward. Like, look, obviously, in today's climate, this type of approach, taking a hands-off approach, just like James Madison recommended for the Constitutionalists, just like Hoppe recommended for the ANCAPs, it really works. So why not apply that same thing to just about everything else? To marijuana freedom, to gun rights, to hemp farming, to healthcare freedom. You can apply this same type of approach to everything. The federal government says we can't do this. Well, we're going to do it anyways. And when enough people and enough local jurisdictions kind of get together on this, it becomes extremely difficult, if not impossible, for the feds to do anything about it. The feds don't have the manpower to deal with, they don't have the manpower or the resources to deal with this, whether it's weed or immigration or guns. Think of it this way. The ATF has about 5,000 employees for the entire country, and about a third of them are in administration. They have a capacity of about 8,000 closed cases per year. So arrest, court, investigation on illegal, so-called illegal guns. Well, let's say there were 10 or 11 million undocumented short-barreled shotguns in the country. They could never do anything about that. So it really gets down to people have to be willing to take a risk for liberty, for things that they believe in, and when enough people do that, it's just going to happen anyways.
So, okay, this seems like a very good, this is an incredibly interesting conversation to me because I'm having a lot of epiphanies, because this seems like a very good synthesis of a sort of principled, sort of libertarian party stand, and the mechanisms that certainly Konkin was describing with agorism, that it's like even the government can't escape the laws of the market.
The market is stronger than everything. It's
right.
Like when the market says we're going to do this, when the market says we want to use cryptocurrency, I'm a Litecoin kind of guy, but we can have
Sure.
you know, when the market says they want that, then you know, what's government going to do about it? Right. I mean, let's say they can shut down one. There's going to be another one that pops up. That's what happens on weed, and I use that as a great example. I've got a lot of supporters who have talked to me. They run marijuana dispensaries, and years ago the story would basically go, when there was a raid, it would be 1 or 2 DEA agents and a bunch of local cops knocking on the door. They would come in, shut them down, take their cash, and then leave, and then in 2-3 days they would reopen.
Right.
These days, the last time I heard someone tell me the story, they said they're reopening in about 6 hours, and all they lose is cash. They basically keep a lot of cash in the drawer because it's like Al Capone showing up, and as long as you provide them with enough, well, I guess, forfeiture money to take right there, then you're going to be open again in a few hours. And with 1,700 marijuana dispensaries in the city of Los Angeles alone, this is not counting San Francisco, San Diego, San Jose, Oakland, all the rest of the part of the state, they just don't have the manpower. So it really takes people overwhelming. The market overwhelms what government wants sometimes.
And so, and I mean, the idea that, coming back to, I mean, I love this idea of sanctuary cities or it's sanctuary community, whatever the sort of smallest level where the federal government is saying, we are basically, they're commandeering in a way. They're commandeering the law enforcement resources of a particular community. If that community decides we're locking the doors of the car, you're not commandeering our car for this, it becomes more expensive for them to, when they're making their choices of where are we going to go to do this enforcement, the cities that are sanctuary cities, it's more expensive for them to do it there, certainly, than it is for them to do it in a city that's like, we're not a sanctuary city, we're going to help the federal government.
So Texas just did that. They actually passed an anti-sanctuary city law saying that no localities can have a sanctuary city policy on immigration. So they're basically saying we're going to require all local law enforcement to help enforce federal immigration law. Whether that's going to stand under the Texas Constitution, I don't know, but people are taking different approaches in different areas. But talking about the localities, that's exactly, again, going back to Hoppe in that 1997 speech. He didn't call them sanctuary cities, but that's what he was saying. All these small localities on everything possible should just stop participating in the enforcement of federal laws. And the way he put it, he says, without local enforcement by compliant local authorities, the will of the central government is not much more than hot air. And Hoppe, as normal, was right.
There you go. So what's interesting about this concept and what's interesting about this tactic is the idea that we are going to get to see with the sanctuary city situation. Like, whatever somebody says, oh, this immigration is good for our community, oh, this immigration is bad for our community, we are going to actually get to see, because you're going to have less enforcement in the sanctuary cities than you do. Texas, by passing this, has basically ensured that almost all of the focus is going to be, because it's going to be cheaper, right? On a per sort of detainment basis, it's way cheaper to go and get 100 people out of Texas than it is to try and go and get 2 out of LA. Right? Because you've got the coordination of all of the local cops that you don't have to pay for. Right? They're being paid by the local citizenry and by property taxes and whatnot. Their salaries are paid. You basically get a free posse in Texas. So we're going to get to see, like, is your community, how benefited, is that a word? How much is your community benefited by helping the federal government in this particular case? But then again, there may be some things where, you know, there may be some preferences within the federal government, like ideas of free speech, like ideas of, you know, freedom of religion, where it's like, no, actually enforcing this works better for our community. I mean, is that really this tactic? Are we really talking about some Austrian economics here and figuring out, like,
no, no, never. Don't mention that. That means we're bad. Of course. The more local it is, the closer you are to the individual, the greater chance that individual liberty can grow. That means in some areas they're going to do what maybe you and I think are terrible. In other areas, we're going to see great things happening. And in the marketplace of ideas, that's how I think the good stuff rises to the top. When you try to force it one way or the other, the good guys are kind of stuck underneath all the force, because, you know, I don't want to use force on people. I don't even vote. I mean, so that's the way I think to actually spread our ideas, but by starting in small areas and providing a case study. In your state of Nevada, over the years, the state has actually banned the use of water for the building of the Yucca Mountain Nuclear Depository.
That's right. Yeah.
And you know what? That thing still isn't getting built after how many years? It's still not getting built because the state said, we're not going to provide you these resources. I would like to see that happen to the NSA data center in Utah, but they're a little scared over there.
This has been a fantastic conversation. It's very, very interesting. I'm sure there are people who would like to know more about you and about the 10th Amendment Center and would like to help out. For all of that, what's their best route? How do they find out more? How do they help you? What type of help can you use and need on a regular basis?
Oh, I need volunteers, I need bloggers, I need cash money, I need gold and Bitcoin. I mean, all that stuff. Just go to 10thamendmentcenter.com. It's all spelled out. Read stuff, share it, and if you really like what you see, then get in touch with us. There's contact buttons all over the place, and get involved. It's that simple.
There we go. Michael Boldin, Executive Director of the 10th Amendment Center. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been a wonderful conversation. We'll have to have you back on to talk about specific statewide issues. I'd love it if you came back.
Yeah, let's do it. We can pick a topic and just kind of roll right through it.
Let's do it. Thank you so much for coming on, brother. We'll talk to you again soon.
Bye.
Very, very interesting conversation, Christian. That actually opened my eyes. I think we started digging into the principle.
That was great.
We started digging into the principle, and there's been some kernel, and you know that I even debated Eric July, you know, being anti-secession, right? Because, and I think that we kind of got at this kernel that, like, actually there is a way that we're actually seeing to start, like, I've always been about local and expand the bubble out, right? That's the agorism. Expand the bubble out. I think that's what Michael is fundamentally saying as well. It's not abolish here and bring it down. It's nullification. It's saying at a local level, no, we're not going to follow that.
Right. Well, that's resistance too. Is abolish here and scale it down. That's resistance. But if you create instead of destroy,
create the alternative.
Then
just behave in an alternative way.
Exactly.
You don't have to resist at all. It's just no. There's no resistance. We're just not going to do it.
Exactly. You're not feeding it anything. You're not giving it any energy.
It's a great strategy, man. It's good. 10thamendmentcenter.com. People should definitely.
That was a great interview. I gotta watch that one again.
Yeah, yeah, man. I mean, I'm. You know, it's weird because I guess I had always. I had gotten it. It's so complex. Right. It's complex. You got to step through it a step at a time. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. I had always kind of thought that the 10th Amendment Center was like a political action group, but now I'm realizing, like, no. It's a philosophical and principled idea that it's the principle of what's in the 10th Amendment. I think they're doing a great job over there. Very, very good. It's super hot in here, dude. I think we've got like 15 minutes, but we may as well end this thing early and get some AC on because I don't have any more stories and the interview's over. So thank you for today, dude. I'm going to say goodbye to the people.
Awesome.
Great show on principles and preferences. It just keeps coming up, man. I think that this is in the zeitgeist. So I hope that everybody is way more sort of versed in terms of the principles that we're talking about. I think it runs through the entire story. I hope that Chelsea Manning comes around and figures this out because I think that she could be a very good voice for liberty, but is right now being a very good voice for socialism. So we're going to see how this whole thing plays out. Preferences are not as powerful as principles. So if you want to check out the archive of this show, go to vinarmani.com. We have revamped the website. Everything is there. It's all searchable. I want to thank my guest, Michael Boldin of the 10th Amendment Center. Go check them out at 10thamendment.com or on Twitter at 10th Amendment, actually. If you want to check out the archive of this in pure audio form, please go and subscribe to our podcast. That's on either iTunes or Stitcher. And we will see you again next week, 10 a.m. Pacific time on Monday. So until then, stay free.